When studying in Rome, Acosta experienced the historic architecture that created the urban environment of the city. By analyzing the architecture that survived through the millennia, he observed that only monuments remained and nothing for the common man. Housing has been made of cheap materials and was not preserved. Though these monuments from places such as Rome and Egypt endured, their true function is still unknown. The design of this architecture relied on only visual aesthetics. The ornamentation of the buildings did not serve any function. Housing is made of cheap materials and will not last. Acosta's response to this condition and this monumental architecture was to design a concept for housing that would transcend time. This new architecture would address the needs of the common man as well as respond to the environment. Housing needs to be a transitory space. It is a place where man can work, spend his leisure time, and sleep. It is a restaurant and a theater. The architect's job is to make space that is livable and protects the inhabitants. His response to these needs was the development of the helios system. Acosta moved to South America and settled in Buenos Aires in 1929, a time when the city was undergoing intense modernization. In the early 1900s, Buenos Aires was South America's largest city due to the economic boom of the 1880s. During this time, many buildings were built to accommodate the growth of the city. Beginning in the 1930s, around the time Acosta arrived, the older colonial buildings that remained were being torn down to make the larger boulevards, which included the boulevards of Corrientes, Santa Fe, and Cordoba. With all the new transformations taking place in Buenos Aires, he began to conceptualize ideas for the new city. He set out to invent a form of life of relations, which would emerge in the city of Buenos Aires. He envisioned replacing the dense colonial grid with a network of linear elements that would weave throughout the city. He envisioned a 100-meter-long, interconnected structure designed to establish new zones of commercial, industrial, and social exchange, and projected the possibility of de-urbanizing the city. New buildings would be organized to optimize the light into the city. Acosta stated in 1931, "Gradually, from the chaos and disorganization of our civilization, a new form of thinking is emerging, a new mode of seeing things, and with it, a new relation between humanity and the world around us, between the parts and the whole." Acosta's research in vivienda e clima led to the development of the helios system, which he spent years designing. The system is an inherently functional system, but by focusing so intensely on design responding to the climate, his architecture transgressed from functionalism and became theatrical. When designing the helios system, Acosta spent time experimenting with different shading devices, orientation, and ventilation systems. The science behind his design was that the sun provides heat, and that the building is a thermal mass. The helios system was meant to accommodate both the summer and winter climates. The orientation was the key element in the design, and the optimum orientation was northeast. Southern orientation was required for visual work, such as drawing or reading. The next problem was designing how to let light into the building. Just having punched openings was not enough, and by using horizontal and vertical planes, the helios system could control how the sun entered the space. Acosta experimented with the placement of these planes. In his research, he came to the conclusion that creating a 2-meter plate and elevating it to a double-story height would accommodate the sun for both the summer and winter months. These architectural elements also served an aesthetic purpose, creating a shadow zone. This distinguished between the outside and the inside. In Argentina, the architecture did not respond to the climate, and there was a desperate need for housing. The new housing that Acosta would propose would interact with the sun, a theme that has been present in architecture as far back as ancient Greece. The Greeks oriented their temples east-west, symbolic of life and death. Though the temples had more of a symbolic relation to the sun, the importance of the sun in the culture was represented through their architecture. Acosta took this symbolic relationship and made it real. This relation manifests itself with the architecture by how the space was experienced, as well as how the building dealt with climate control. Drawing from Greek mythology, he named his concept after the god of sun, Helios. The use of sun shading to protect against the sun was not a new idea. Le Corbusier made substantial progress in the design by the brise-soleil. Similar to Acosta's helios system, the brise-soleil helped with glare from the sun as well as climate control. Acosta took the concept of a brise-soleil a step further, having his designs completely integrated with the architectural elements used for climate control. Acosta developed the helios system to be functional. He wanted to design architecture that responded to the environment and the needs of the inhabitants. The design is modern, based on science, new technology, and the human form. Early in his career, Acosta designed furniture that relied on the human form. He designed a chair that used bent metal tubes, which had some give to allow for comfort. Acosta believed the difference between modern architecture and classical architecture was the issue of aesthetics. Though he designed ignoring any sort of aesthetics ideals, his interiors had a distinct expressionist quality. The majority of his houses were made with white plaster, not using any ornamentation, so the dynamic qualities of the houses relied on science, or how the houses interacted with the sun. The influence from his early work in set design is apparent in how the interiors are represented in his perspectives, and how the sun enters a room. The architecture that he designed was so reliant on this one function that it actually transcended the ideal of functionalism and in a way became poetic. The poetics of the helios system did not come from the scientific research behind the system, but in a way, he designed his architecture to engage the sun on the interior. The housing from ancient times were made of cheap materials and did not last. This sparked his interest in a housing that would transcend time. Using durable materials and an ageless concept, he had interest in designing housing. Though he applied this concept in different locations, he changed the materials to match the local conditions. This can be seen in his houses in Cordoba, Argentina. He utilized the local stone material instead of the plaster that he typically designed with in the area of Buenos Aires. Via Urquiza was designed from 1934 to 35. The design utilizes research and applied the helios system. The via incorporates a two-sided cupboard that could be accessed from the dining room and from the kitchen. to allow for easier cleanup after dinner. Many of his houses incorporated this element, including earlier houses he designed in Germany. This cupboard was intended to aid the occupant. Like many of his other designs that use the helios system, the house has pristinely plastered walls. The enclosed spaces are a series of volumes within planar elements that act as shading. This is one of the reasons why Acosta's system is successful, because the shading system is fully integrated into the design. He applied the design of the helios system to multiple projects. With these projects, his presentation drawings of the design were drawn with the rationality of the system, but his perspective showed the theatricality to the spaces. Acosta took the design for single-family homes and applied them to multifamily housing. There were two different typologies used, one raised off the ground in pilotis, which is typology 1, and the other on the ground, typology 2. These multifamily homes were meant to help fix the housing crisis of the time and create safe, affordable homes. Proyecto de unidad vecinal, or multifamily housing for the Isla Maciel, was a response to the slum conditions on the island. The way the housing was laid out on the island created spaces where gangs would gather, which would make unsafe conditions for families on the island. In his design, he eliminated the corridor, instead having multiple stairs that would go up to the different apartments. In having a design that would eliminate the corridor, there would be fewer occurrences of arguments between neighbors. The design also had an open public element that would allow for a community to form, but all the apartments had their own private balcony. These balconies were off of the dining and living rooms to create an extension of these spaces. The project Edificio de Departamentos en la Avenida Figueroa Cordo in Buenos Aires, Acosta experimented with applying the helios system vertically. In this project, it can be argued that they are not as successful. This could be for many reasons. Many of his more horizontal projects also received sun shading from surrounding plantings, but the tower did not have that same condition. Also, his designs were typically a mass within a series of planes. The apartment buildings did not have this element in the design. The shading system was only applied to the facade. Throughout his career in Argentina, Acosta was concerned with how the common man lived. With this concern, he saw a solution through developing the helios system, a system which would respond to the environment as well as the need for a durable housing type. He devoted most of his life to this work, and although many of these problems still exist, his concept for the helios system is still seen today in the form of sustainability.